Welcome, everybody, to the Definitely Uncertain podcast. My name is Darren Rockman, and I am a partner at Gold Rock Capital, the 21-year-old multifamily office servicing families in Israel and around the world. Now, COVID has highlighted, like never before in our lifetime, the vital role of government at the moments of severe stress and dislocation. But it's also highlighted the unique role of philanthropy and the many challenges that donors face, particularly at times like this. And so to talk to us about it, I welcome Kris Putnam-Walkerly to the podcast. Hi, Kris.
Hi, Darren. Thanks for having me.
That's a pleasure. Thank you for joining. So Kris is coming to us from Cleveland, Ohio. She is an advisor, a philanthropic advisor who's helped over 100 philanthropists do their strategic allocation. She's been a contributor to many publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and others. And she's the author of a new book called Delusional Altruism. I got to say, I love the title. Delusional Altruism, Why Philanthropists Fail to Achieve Change and What They Can Do to Transform Giving. So, Kris, let's start. How does one become a philanthropic advisor?
Well, that's a great question. There's many paths, but the path that I chose started at Stanford University, where I was evaluating youth and gang violence prevention programs. And I was doing this across the state of California. And it was a project funded entirely by a foundation, the California Wellness Foundation. And so I became very intrigued by the power of philanthropy. You know, if you're a philanthropist, if you're a philanthropic family or a foundation, if nothing else, you have wealth. And if you allocate that wealth wisely and put it to good use, bring in top experts to really advise your thinking and your planning, you can really create a lot of positive change. And so I thought it would be great to go work for a foundation. And so I chose, I think, the largest foundation in the US at the time. It was the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. So this is a family foundation of Dave Packard of HP. And that was a great opportunity. I was supporting children's health issues and learned that I loved philanthropy. And I began consulting on the side, learned that I loved consulting. And so decided to launch my consulting business in philanthropy.
Fantastic. Great. Well, look, let's get into Corona. And the last year has obviously been a hugely challenging one for philanthropists in trying to deal with Corona and its effect on the economy and on people. So can you talk about some of the mistakes that you see that philanthropists have made during the crisis and what people can do instead? How do we learn from this?
Yeah. There's a lot of mistakes that funders typically make in a disaster or a crisis. I think the first is there's an instinct to hide, to kind of go into hiding. And we saw this even with, the world's wealthiest individuals, where they're kind of nowhere to be found because either they're in fear or in denial, or it's not quite clear. But last July, so COVID, we're a year into COVID, and last July there was a study by WealthX that showed that of the world's billionaires, so this is, 5 months into COVID, 10% of them had donated or pledged to donate in response to COVID, which meant that 90% of the world's billionaires had not. Right. And so, to me, that's kind of going into hiding. They're nowhere to be found. A second response is to take a wait and see approach.
Right.
Let's wait and see how this whole crisis shakes out. And I remember talking to many philanthropists at the beginning of COVID who said, well, clearly we need to do something, but we're not quite sure. So we're just going to wait and see. We'll wait till September. We'll wait till the fall when this whole thing will be over, back when we thought it would be over quickly. And we'll see how this whole thing shakes out. And the problem with that is, A, you don't quite know how long a crisis is going to last, but B, there's so much need immediately. If you wait and see till the whole thing is over, you've missed a whole opportunity to help. And also, I think one thing this crisis has showed us is that, any strategy, any strategic plan that existed before the crisis can't possibly remain intact post-crisis, right? Something has to change. And so as a philanthropist, you need your own strategy. You need a giving strategy or clarity on how you give and the kind of change you want to make. And so if you're waiting 6 months to do anything, or even to think about how do I do my work differently, then you're really losing out on a huge opportunity to respond in meaningful ways to the crisis. So that's a second one. The third, I think, is many funders kind of stop building their philanthropic muscle, meaning, to have the greatest impact as a funder, you have to invest in yourself, invest in your own learning and your own knowledge. And a lot of funders kind of simply stop during the crisis. And I think it's really an opportunity to make sure that you're investing in yourself, investing in your strategy, getting advice and guidance from people who can help you, learning what's happening in the community on the ground so that you know where to direct your resources and where to get help. And so, those are some of the major crises or mistakes. Another one, though, is putting all of your money in the immediate response bucket, meaning,
that's sort of the opposite mistake, if you will.
Yeah, right. So, because crises have multiple stages, any crises, if it's an earthquake or a tsunami or a pandemic. So yes, there's a need for immediate response, but also you need to think about long-term, rebuilding or recovery or systems rebuilding. I mean, think of the education system. We all have, it was clearly obvious, the lack of equitable education in the world and the inability of many people and families to, in school systems to respond during the crisis. And so thinking about how do you ensure that there's better systems change and reform in education as just one example.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that particular point because somebody that we were close to who was involved in education and providing educational frameworks actually used the crisis in order to help some of the schools he was involved in upgrade their technical capacity so that students could learn better at home in a way that they hadn't been able to before. Did you see a lot of that sort of learning happening? Did you see people saying, okay, my strategy was focused on A, I now need to readjust and focus on B? Or was there more of this sort of bunker mentality?
Well, there was both for sure. I think probably on the whole, there was probably more bunker mentality, but there were a lot of funders that really responded well, responded quickly, and immediately shed some of their old practices that never were that effective in the first place.
Give me some examples of what you saw that funders did right. Give me some of those stories.
Yeah. So for example, the Libra Foundation, for example, which is based as a family office, the Pritzker family, one of the things that they did immediately was doubled their grant making budget for the year. Right. So normally they give away whatever the amount was. I'm making this up. Let's say it's 10 million. They doubled it to 20 million. For the year, just recognizing the needs were so great. Other funders and donors just removed restrictions. So instead of nonprofits having to apply for funding in the middle of a crisis, they said, hey, you're an important organization. We've supported you in the past. Clearly, you're playing a role right now. Here's a check, or, we're wiring you money. You don't even need to apply. And don't bother with a report at the end of the year. Like when this whole thing is over, we're going to call you and we'll take notes. Well, just tell us what happened, right?
Right.
And that trust, that trusting the nonprofit to do the right thing. Many donors removed restrictions. So sometimes a grant is for a specific purpose, like for, let's say it's early childhood education. Mm-hmm. It might be to pay the teachers or build the schools, right? Well, nonprofits not only needed to change gears, but a lot of them just needed general operating support, unrestricted money to do what they felt was the right thing to do in the moment, or to take advantage of opportunities that were presenting themselves. And so a lot of donors removed the restrictions that they had on grants. Mm-hmm.
I want to pick up that point about money for operations, because in some of the nonprofits that I've seen involved with, this move towards we will give you a grant for this, you do this program, we'll support it, is a big movement in philanthropy, certainly here in Israel. My guess is also in the United States. Do you see that funders are starting to understand that operational capacity and working capital is really critical for some of these charities?
Yeah, there is an increasing movement to provide both general operating support, that kind of unrestricted dollars, but also to recognize the myth of overhead. So often we think that overhead is bad.
What a waste! Terrible. Have to pay all these smart people.
Right. And so, it's so common. It's such a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, this is a great nonprofit. They only spend, 1 cent on every dollar they receive goes to administration or overhead.
Right.
And 99 cents goes to help the people they're serving. Well, that seems noble, but I actually think it's delusional. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write my book, Delusional Altruism, is because, if you really believe in a cause, whatever it is, mental health or education or curing cancer, don't you want top minds working on that? Don't you want those nonprofits to have great financial management systems, a fabulous board of directors, the ability to evaluate themselves and make course corrections?
And guess what? That all costs money.
It all costs money, right? And as business owners, entrepreneurs know this. We invest in research and development. We invest in talent recruitment and retention. We invest in systems and technology. Well, we do that because we need to invest in ourselves to grow and to be successful, to innovate and compete. And, nonprofits really need to be doing the same thing. But instead, what too many philanthropists do is they dole out little bits of money for certain specific things, and it forces the nonprofit to run around like with a bucket almost, trying to catch money and figure out how to piece it together.
Not only that, it forces them to report back to their donors saying, yeah, we have offices, but we're going to we're going to put it into some type of program budget, so you end up just shifting around coins on the board. Pieces on the board. So you were talking about your book. So I'll give you another opening. What other delusional altruism? It's fantastic. It really is fantastic. What other examples can you give us?
Oh, there's so many. Well, the first really, I was referring to it before, is that scarcity mindset. I think many funders actually, despite all of their wealth, have a scarcity mindset when it comes to investing in the nonprofits they support, but also when it comes to investing in themselves. And by that, I mean, as a donor, to have the greatest impact, I think you need to be the greatest philanthropist you can be. And to me, that means investing in yourself. I don't mean, taking your family on a luxury yacht for a family retreat, although that's fine.
That's nice. Yeah,
but I do mean, I'm not going to, but what I do mean is investing in your own learning. Really, if you care about an issue, really invest some time in learning about it. Talk to the nonprofits that are working on that issue. Really understand what the challenges are on the ground. Invest in building relationships and trusting relationships with those nonprofits, so that when there is a crisis, you can call them right away and say, I'm here, like, what do you need? How can I help? And they feel comfortable enough with you, their donor, to say, hey, we're having a problem. Like, we need your help. Can you help us? Even if it's just help us talk through this challenge that we're having. Those are really important investments that we need to make in ourselves. I think the other one is funders move too slowly.
Why is that?
Because they can.
That's a great answer.
Honestly, there's not a lot of accountability, right? In philanthropy. Chances, on
the donor side, there's a lot of accountability. On the nonprofit side.
Exactly. On the donor side, there's not a lot of accountability. And so you can take your sweet old time. And it's a challenge. It's like that wait and see approach. You can wait and see. That's not going to appear on the front page of a newspaper. And the people that are most frustrated by that are your nonprofit grantees. They're not likely to complain because they're worried that they're going to not get a grant from you. Yeah. And so really they can. And I think, one of the ways I see this the most problematic is in strategy development. So I help a lot of my clients create their strategies. If it's their strategic plan, philanthropic strategy around, giving. And really that to me is just, what are you trying to accomplish a year from now? What kind of philanthropist or philanthropic family do you want to be? What kind of impact do you want to be having in your community or on a certain issue? Then looking at where are you today, and then figuring out what are the 2, 3, 4 most important things you need to focus on in the next year to begin moving you from where you are today to where you want to be. And really that's your plan, right? And align people to help that happen. But too often funders don't have a strategy. They're just kind of willy-nilly giving to causes based on, their friends requesting that they contribute to their cause, or something emerges, or they hear about something, on an airplane.
The multi-level marketing approach to philanthropy.
And when they do create a strategy, they spend way too long doing it, like a year process of like multiple meetings.
And we're not giving any money in the meantime because we're doing strategic planning.
Exactly. And I think it can be done in a week. It can really be done in a day, you know, with a little bit of prep time and bringing people together. I do these virtually, you know, a day, or break it out over a couple days and shorter bits of time over Zoom to get clarity on their strategy. And they walk out the door with an action plan of what's most important, who's accountable for what. And then I coach them to implement those plans. It can be done really quickly. And what that enables is it enables the funder to focus on what's most important, align their resources, if it's just themselves or they have staff, to achieve their strategy, and gets them moving quickly. And one of the challenges I see a lot right now, especially this past year, is conditions keep changing, right? And so a lot of people feel like, well, I can't possibly plan ahead because
I don't know what tomorrow's going to be. Yeah.
Right. And so I actually wrote a guide that I think your listeners might be interested in downloading. It's called 8 Things Every Philanthropist Can Do to Change the World, Even When the World Keeps Changing. And it's really 8 steps to planning for anything, to creating a strategic plan, a giving plan, a communications plan, if you're planning a wedding, you know, really, because a lot of it is about that mindset shift of, yes, the future is uncertain, but it's really no more uncertain today than it was 2 years ago or last decade or last century.
Right.
And so instead of allowing that unknown future to paralyze you, to really let it free you, because you can't plan for every contingency. So why bother? And, you know, but you can create clarity on what you're trying to do with the confidence that you can change along the way, and actually building in time to do that.
Right. Interesting. You know, one of the things we've seen here in Israel, certainly over the last 12 months, was alongside this crisis, there's also been this growth in wealth, particularly around technology, people having exits in technology companies, flotations and stuff. And that's created a generation of new wealth. And alongside new wealth, or great power and great responsibilities, as Spider-Man likes to sort of say, how do you help people that coming into wealth for the first time deal with? There's not been a history, there's no family foundation and some big oak table where grandpa and great grandpa sat around doling out money. How do you help the new wealthy get their mindset around strategy, responsibility? Partnership building, not looking down on the grantors, but viewing them as true partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, it starts with a conversation that really focuses on what's most meaningful and important to them. So if that's, are there issues in the world that they've observed, read about, seen in the news that are really compelling to them, or that they saw on vacation, or their own family? I mean, a lot of people give because they support substance abuse treatment programs because somebody in their family was an addict.
Medical condition.
Right, or whatever it is. And so I think, or their parent was abused, and so they know that, spousal abuse or domestic violence is an important issue. And so, it takes, not sometimes a while, but not very long, to really help unpack what are some of those issues that are meaningful to you. And then once you do that, one of the things I like to do is have them do an exercise of kind of their own research, really. And by research, I don't mean, something extensive, but can you spend, a couple of hours looking up this challenge? This issue, one of the clients I'm working with right now is very interested in supporting Native American communities in the United States. And so I identified some sources of information that they could go look at to do kind of their own exploration, their own listening, their own reading, their own learning, and to come back and have a discussion with me and talk about what they learned, what surprised them, what was meaningful. Are there particular ways they want to contribute to those communities? Because, Native American is quite a broad category in and of itself. And so to me, that's really helpful because it's starting with what's most interesting and important to them, and allowing them an opportunity to see where it takes them and to learn, and from there creating, grant making strategies to support those issues and causes.
Interesting. In your book, you say something which is quite interesting. You say that how we give is as important as the amount we give. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean that look, you can give away, $1 million. We can each walk down the street and give away like $1 bills a million times or throw it out the window, right? There's lots of ways to give. But what's most important to me is how you give, meaning, are you giving kind of haphazardly, or do you have a strategy? Are you giving in ways that restrict the nonprofit from making a difference along the ways we were just discussing? Yeah. Putting lots of like hoops and hurdles and restrictions on how they can use it.
And reporting requirements.
And burdensome processes, or are you giving in ways that really trust the nonprofit leader, that they know the issue, they know the community, you believe in them and you trust them, so that you're giving them the freedom to use that money the way they see fit? Or are you giving in ways that really build the capacity of those nonprofits to do the work as well as they possibly can? Are you giving in ways that are transformational, meaning you're trying to create lasting change, maybe changing systems or policies so that the problem no longer exists? Or are you giving in kind of Band-Aid solutions that, you're just kind of helping here and there, right, but it's not going to, at the end of the day, nothing's going to be different. And so that's the how, the how we give. And, too often I think we focus on the amount and we focus on the transaction. And I think what we need to focus on is the transformation. So too often I think wealth advisors and even family offices, I'm sure you guys don't do this, but
of course,
family office leaders.
I don't even know what you're about to say, but we don't do it.
The family will say, we want to start a foundation. And the wealth advisor will say, okay, I'll set it up for you. Right. And a foundation, it's not a bad thing to do, but that's the transaction. Yeah. There's lots of giving vehicles, but a foundation isn't necessarily the right one. I think it's more important to say first to that family, well, what are you trying to accomplish with your giving? And then figure out, well, what's the best way to accomplish that? And then what are the right vehicles? It could be a donor advised fund. It could be contributing to a pooled fund with other donors. It could be lots of things.
Right.
But focusing on that transformation is the most important how.
Interesting. I want to just pick up on something we talked about before, which is this idea of reporting and accountability. I think that a lot of funders and families view the amount of, or the thickness of the report as an indication of how serious they are and how diligent they are. And as a result, the more established the foundation becomes, the thicker the document that needs to be put in every quarter or every year, like the SEC. Nice big thick report. You're being transparent. Right. So how do funders create the right balance between, on one hand, making sure that the grantees are actually doing what they said they were going to do and are being transparent about what they're using their money for, and on the other hand, not overburdening them with useless reports and hoops?
Well, two things. I think there's a way you do that on the front end and then on the back end. So on the front end, I think it's really only asking the questions and asking for the information you actually need to make a funding decision. So I was talking with a friend of mine who's a well-known family. I'm not going to mention them, but everyone in the world will know the product that they make. And they have a family foundation, and they realized that they were asking their nonprofit grantees a lot of questions that they were just curious about. They were just like interested theoretically in,
right.
It was intriguing to them.
How often do you change your pajamas?
Yeah, right, exactly. And so, but it had nothing to do with what they needed in terms of making a funding decision. But meanwhile, the nonprofit's taking this very seriously and like thinking it through, and probably spent,
and it's a big family and there's a lot of money involved and they're very important.
Right. So they're probably spending 8 hours on that question, just answering it. What a waste of time. And so they remove those questions. So I think getting clarity on what do you actually need to know and what's the best way to know it? Sometimes it's an application. Sometimes it's a conversation. Yeah. Sometimes it's you're volunteering with that group and you see them in action, so what do you need to know? And on the back end, meaning it's been a year or 2 years, the grant is over, what do you want to have learned? And what's the best way to learn it? So again, it doesn't need to be length. And will you use that information? So it doesn't need to be lengthy, but, if you make a nonprofit, again, if you ask them a whole bunch of questions, they could spend a week filling out that report. That could be one person's job for 40 hours. In fact, in the book, I give this example. There's a large US-based foundation where one of the program officers admitted in a meeting that they only read about 15 or 20% of all the grant reports that they receive. Wow. And I was talking to a colleague of mine who's a grantee who says he regularly spends 40 hours preparing those grant reports. Well, think of that 40 hours deployed.
What else? Sure. What else could be done with it? Yeah.
Right. Fundraising or relationship building or just thinking. If that guy could have sat for a week and thought about the future of his organization, that would have put them, so much further ahead.
Yeah, well, I can really relate to that. I have the privilege of sitting on the board of a really outstanding nonprofit here, and I know how much of the managing director, executive director's time is taken on reporting, and it's important, and the funders require it, and they're not wrong. But yeah, I think sometimes it is a bit of overkill. So I think that's been really a really terrific overview of some of the mistakes and some of the good things that we've learned from this COVID crisis when it comes to philanthropy. And clearly, the donors that work with you have an outstanding advisor along the side, so they're very, very lucky. So, Kris Putnam-Walkerly, thank you very, very much for joining us from Ohio on the Definitely Uncertain podcast.
Oh, you're so welcome. And if it's okay with you, can I share with your listeners how to download that free guide that I mentioned earlier?
With greatest pleasure. Go for it.
Awesome. So again, it's called 8 Things Every Philanthropist Can Do to Change the World, Even When the World Keeps Changing. And you can text the word PLAN 2021. If you're outside the US, text it to the number +1 909 741 1321. So that's +1 909 741 1321. Or if you're in the US, it's text it to 411321. And again, it's the word PLAN 2021.
Okay, well, there you go. And you will get that free guide. And Kris, thank you very much. And thanks everybody for listening. And we'll see you on future episodes of the Definitely Uncertain podcast. If you have ideas or suggestions for the podcast, please do send us an email to podcast@goldrockcap.com. Thanks everyone, and goodbye.